My parents stole my money and tried to erase me. When I survived, I exposed them and sent to prison. You know those family vacations where everyone comes back with cute photos, funny stories, and maybe a sunburn or two? Yeah, this isn't one of those. When I was 15, my parents decided it was time for a character-building trip, their words, not mine. Looking back, I should have known something was off when they didn't pack any snacks, didn't book a cabin, and had that weird, forced cheerfulness like they were about to drop off a dog they didn't want anymore. The red flags were there long before we reached the lake. My dad had been borrowing money from my savings account for months, the account my grandparents set up for my college fund. Every time I asked about the missing cash, he gave me some garbage about family emergencies and we're all in this together. Mom played along, acting like I was selfish for even questioning it. We're your parents, she'd snap. You think money matters more than family? Yeah, that line hit different when I found out they'd used part of that money to pay off Dad's gambling debts and the rest to fund this little vacation. We drove for hours in silence, I sandwiched between two duffel bags in the back seat while my dad hummed off-key to the radio and my mom chain-smoked like she was prepping for a world record. No one told me where we were going. Every time I asked, Dad just said, "You'll see, champ," with that fake grin he reserved for school parent-teacher nights and IRS audits. When we finally pulled up to this desolate lake, and I mean the kind of lake where horror movies start, I realized this wasn't going to be a fishing trip. Out, Dad said, putting the car in park. I stepped out confused but trying to play it cool. That's when Mom popped the trunk and handed me a half-inflated tube, you know, the kind that's more of a suggestion than actual flotation. Swim, she said flatly, avoiding eye contact. I laughed, waiting for the punchline. Good one. Where's the boat? Dad's smile dropped. No boat. Swim to the other side. I looked across the lake. It was massive, the far shore barely visible through the morning mist. You're joking, right? Mom lit another cigarette, exhaling like I was wasting her time. We're serious. Swim, or figure it out. Then came the final twist of the knife. As I stood there, heart racing, Dad tossed something at my feet, my wallet. Empty. Oh, and don't bother calling anyone when you get across, he sneered. We canceled your phone plan this morning. Too expensive keeping you connected when you clearly need to learn independence. I felt my stomach drop. My phone. My cash. Gone. Before I could process what was happening, Dad grabbed my arm, yanked me toward the water, and tossed me in like yesterday's garbage. The shock of the cold hit me first. Then panic. I surfaced, gasping, watching as my parents, the people who were supposed to protect me, stood on the shore, emotionless. Weeks after the trial, while my parents rotted behind bars, I thought that would be enough. That seeing them stripped of everything, status, money, freedom, would satisfy the storm inside me. It didn't. Because then came the letter. A sleazy, handwritten note smuggled out from my father through some mutual friend who clearly didn't get the memo about cutting ties. The letter wasn't an apology, it was a threat wrapped in pathetic delusion. You think this is over? Blood is blood. You owe us. When we get out, we'll rebuild. And you'll regret betraying your own family. That was the moment I realized people like them don't stop. Not unless you make them. So, I dug deeper into every corner of their past they thought was buried. With Caldwell's resources and Uncle Ray's insider knowledge, we uncovered offshore accounts they thought no one knew about. Hidden assets, dirty dealings that stretched back years before I was even born. They planned for every escape except me. I handed everything over to federal authorities, ensuring that even if they survived prison, they'd walk out into a life of perpetual legal hell. Every hidden dollar seized, every shady associate exposed. But I wasn't done. Remember those friends who tried to play both sides? The ones who fed my parents information during the investigation, hoping to cash in on favors later? I exposed them too. Anonymous tips. Leaked messages. Suddenly, half the town's elite found themselves under scrutiny, fraud, tax evasion, bribery. Turns out corruption loves company. By the time the dust settled, it wasn't just my parents who were ruined, it was everyone who ever thought protecting them was smarter than standing up to them. As for me, I didn't just rebuild, I reinvented. With my grandfather's check and a hefty compensation package from a civil suit Caldwell filed on my behalf, I left that town behind. But before I did, I made one last stop. The lake. It was eerily calm that day, like it didn't remember trying to swallow me whole. I didn't just toss the half-inflated tube back, I set it on fire first. Watched as the flames ate away at the rubber, the smoke curling into the sky like a signal to the universe that I wasn't their victim anymore. As the charred remains sank beneath the surface, I felt lighter. Months later, in a new city with a fresh start, I received news that my parents weren't getting out anytime soon. Additional charges, thanks to those offshore accounts, added years to their sentences. Poetic justice. Uncle Ray visited me often, always bringing stories of how the town was still reeling from the fallout. Grandma, now celebrated as the matriarch who stood against the corruption, finally had peace. One evening, as I looked out over my tiny apartment balcony, sipping cheap wine that tasted like victory, I realized something important. Revenge hadn't consumed me. It had freed me. Because sometimes walking away isn't enough. Sometimes you have to make sure there's nothing left for the monsters to crawl back to. What do you think? Did I go too far ensuring they could never rise again, or is that exactly what they deserved? See you on the other side, Dad called out before turning back to the car. And just like that they drove away. No life jacket. No goodbye. Just me, a useless tube, an empty wallet, no phone, and miles of open water. That was the day I realized family isn't always blood. It's survival. They didn't just want to test me. They wanted to erase me financially, emotionally, physically. If I made it out of that lake alive, I swore I'd never be the powerless kid they thought they could abandon. They wanted me to sink? I was going to learn how to drown them instead, figuratively, of course. But first, I had to survive. Cold. That's all I could feel when I hit the water, a bone-deep chill that stole the air from my lungs and replaced it with pure panic. I kicked frantically, clutching the half-dead tube like it was some magical lifeline, even though we both knew it was about as useful as my parents' promises. The shore behind me was already empty, no sign of the car, no second thoughts, no, just kidding. They were gone. Really gone. I started paddling, but it didn't take long for the weight of what just happened to hit harder than the cold. My parents had set me up to fail. Not just dump me in a lake, they stripped me of my savings, destroyed my phone, and left me stranded miles from anything resembling civilization. And for what? Some twisted lesson in independence? Hours dragged on. The sun beat down, turning my skin raw. The tube sagged more with every passing minute, mocking me as much as their parting words. Somewhere between exhaustion and hopelessness, I broke. I screamed into the empty sky until my throat burned, cursed their names, and begged anyone, anything to help me. Tears mixed with lake water as I pounded my fists against the useless rubber tube, sobbing like the scared kid I was. That's when I saw it, the boat. An old man fishing, lazily watching his line. Relief washed over me like a second wave. I screamed and waved my arms, nearly flipping off the tube in desperation. He saw me. Our eyes locked. For a heartbeat, I thought I was saved. But instead of helping, he shook his head slowly like I was some stray animal he didn't want to deal with. He muttered something I'd later learn it was troublemaker and began rowing away. No. Please. I shrieked, voice cracking. I need help. Nothing. Just the sound of oars cutting through water as he vanished into the distance. I floated there stunned. Betrayed by strangers now too. When I finally dragged myself onto the far shore, sunburnt, shivering, lips cracked and bleeding, I stumbled toward a nearby dock where a group of teens were hanging out. Familiar faces. It was Josh, a guy from school. We weren't close, but we'd shared classes and laughed at the same dumb jokes. For a moment, hope sparked again. Josh. Hey man, I need your phone, I need to call someone, I croaked, barely able to stand. He looked at me like I was a ghost. Dude, my dad said you snapped. That you attacked your parents and ran off. He told everyone at the marina to stay away from you. I stared at him, heart sinking deeper than that lake. You know me, Josh. Does that sound like something I'd do? He hesitated just for a second before shaking his head. I'm sorry, man. I can't get involved. He turned away, pulling out his phone, probably texting the whole school about how I'd shown up looking like a drowned rat, begging for help. The other teens laughed nervously, whispering behind their hands as I stood there, humiliated, every shred of dignity stripped away. I backed off, swallowing the lump in my throat, realizing that my parents hadn't just abandoned me physically, they'd nuked my reputation before I even hit the water. By the time I found an old payphone near a dusty gas station, I knew better than to call home. I called my grandmother, the only person who ever showed me genuine kindness. When she answered, her voice was tight. I've been expecting this call. That's when I learned she knew. She'd warned my parents not to pull the stunt. Begged them to think twice. But they didn't listen. Stay where you are, she said. I'm coming to get you. And when I do, we're going to make sure they regret ever thinking they could throw you away. As I hung up, something inside me shifted. I wasn't just a kid who survived a lake anymore. I was someone with nothing left to lose, and that made me dangerous. My grandmother arrived in a cloud of dust and righteous fury. Her old pickup truck screeched to a halt outside that grimy gas station, and before I could even step forward, she was out of the cab, pulling me into a hug so tight it felt like the first real warmth I'd felt in days. Those miserable excuses for parents, she muttered, pulling back to inspect me, sunburned, shivering, clothes still damp and stained with lake water and humiliation. I should have dragged them by their ears when they first mentioned this insanity. We didn't talk much on the drive back to her place. I was too drained and she was too busy gripping the steering wheel like she wanted it to be my father's neck. Her house became my sanctuary, a small, cozy place filled with the scent of baked bread and old books. But even safety couldn't silence the storm in my head. Over the next few days, the fallout began. Word spread fast in our town. My parents, ever the manipulators, had already painted themselves as victims. They told anyone who'd listened that I was out of control, that I'd run away after attacking them, and that they had no choice but to let me go for everyone's safety. Teachers, neighbors, and even distant relatives began treating me like I was radioactive. I saw the looks when I went into town, the whispers behind my hands, the way people crossed the street to avoid me. But the worst betrayal came when I checked my social media. My so-called best friend, Lucas, had posted a long, dramatic status about how he always knew something was off about me. How he stood by me even when I showed violent tendencies, but now he had to cut ties for his own well-being. The comments were a parade of former friends patting him on the back, sharing wild stories that were either twisted half-truths or outright lies. I stared at the screen, heart pounding, as my entire social life crumbled in real time. But then something snapped. I wasn't going to sit there and let them rewrite my story. One night, sitting at my grandmother's kitchen table, I laid it all out for her, every betrayal, every lie, every stolen dollar. She listened, nodding slowly, her expression darkening with every word. When I finished, she leaned back and gave me a look I'd never forget. "You know," she said, tapping her fingers on the table, "your grandfather didn't leave me much when he passed. But he did leave me one thing, a very good lawyer." I blinked. What would a lawyer do? They didn't break any laws. Her lips curled into a sly smile. Didn't they? Stealing from your college fund? Defamation? Emotional abuse? And if we dig deep enough, I'd bet good money your father's gambling problems left a trail of fraud somewhere. For the first time since that lake, I felt something other than rage or despair. I felt possibility. We spent the next week gathering everything: bank statements, text messages, old emails. Turns out my parents were sloppy. Very sloppy. They'd siphoned money not just from me but from accounts meant for household bills, even some tied to my grandmother's name, accounts she never authorized. The lawyer, Mr. Caldwell, nearly choked on his coffee when we showed him the evidence. "This isn't just bad parenting," he said, eyes gleaming. "This is prosecutable." But legal revenge wasn't enough. I wanted everyone to see them for who they really were. So I started documenting everything anonymously, of course. A blog, a few well-placed posts on local forums, screenshots of their hypocrisy without naming myself directly. The town that once whispered about me? They started whispering about my parents instead. "Did you hear about the Johnsons?" I thought their son was the problem, but now I'm not so sure. The tide was turning. And I wasn't done yet. Because tearing down their reputation was just phase 1. Phase 2? Making sure they paid in ways they never saw coming. If phase 1 was about survival and clearing my name, phase 2 was about flipping the script and flipping it hard. Mr. Caldwell didn't waste time. Within days, he filed claims against my parents for financial fraud, theft, and emotional abuse. But the real bombshell? He uncovered something I never saw coming. Did you know, Caldwell began one afternoon adjusting his glasses with that gleam lawyers get when they smell blood, that your parents took out a life insurance policy on you? I nearly dropped the folder I was holding. "What? A sizable one," he continued. "Filed just 2 months before that Little Lake incident." I felt the room spin. It wasn't just abandonment. They had literally placed a bet on me not making it out of that water. My grandmother's face went pale with fury. Those monsters. That discovery turned everything darker and more dangerous. We pushed forward, but the deeper we dug, the more rot we found. Turns out, my parents weren't just screwing me over, they were neck-deep in debt with some very shady people thanks to my father's gambling addiction. One night, as I was organizing documents, there was a knock at my grandmother's door. It wasn't the police. It wasn't a neighbor. It was Uncle Ray. Now, Uncle Ray was always the fun relative, the guy who showed up at BBQs with jokes and fireworks. But that night, his usual grin was replaced by something colder. "We need to talk," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invite. He sat us down and dropped a truth bomb I didn't see coming. "Your parents owe money to people who don't send reminders, they send warnings," he said, glancing at me. "And now that they're cornered, they're throwing your name around. Telling these guys you ran off with cash that was meant for them." I felt my stomach twist. "They're trying to feed me to loan sharks now?" Ray nodded grimly. "If they think it'll buy them time, yeah. It wasn't enough that they tried to drown me, ruin my reputation, and steal my future, they were now setting me up as a target for dangerous people." That night, Grandma, Ray, and I sat around the table realizing this wasn't just a family feud anymore. "We need to end this," Grandma said, her voice steely. "Not just legally. Publicly. Permanently." And so, phase 2 became phase 3, total annihilation. We leaked the life insurance documents anonymously to a journalist who was already sniffing around thanks to the growing blog posts and town gossip. The headline hit harder than I expected. "Parents of local teen accused of faking runaway story, life insurance policy sparks investigation." The media storm exploded overnight. Reporters camped outside my parents' house. CPS and financial crimes units launched full-scale investigations. Neighbors who once whispered about me now crossed the street to avoid being associated with them. But the real twist? Lucas, the same best friend who trashed me online, reached out begging to talk. I met him in a public place, just in case. I didn't know, he blurted out, eyes wide with guilt. "Your dad," he threatened my family. "Said if I didn't post that stuff about you, he'd ruin my dad's business." I wanted to punch him. But more than that, I wanted information. "Then help me fix it," I said coldly. Lucas handed over screenshots, proof of my father's threats, manipulation, and even hints that he'd blackmailed other families in town for years. With that evidence, the final nails were hammered into their coffins. By the end of the week, my parents were facing not just lawsuits, but potential criminal charges that could land them behind bars. And me? I was no longer the abandoned kid. I was the one holding the matches as their world burned. If my parents thought they could wriggle out of this mess like they always did, playing the victims, twisting the narrative, they were about to learn what it felt like when every escape route collapsed at once. The first blow landed when the bank froze their accounts. Mr. Caldwell made sure every cent tied to my stolen college fund was locked down pending investigation. Suddenly, their lavish spending habits screeched to a halt. No more fancy dinners, no more betting slips for dad, no more salon trips for mom. But it got worse. Turns out my father had been using my name and my social security number to open lines of credit. I discovered this when a debt collector called me demanding payment on a credit card I never knew existed. Caldwell nearly salivated when I told him. Identity theft, he said, jotting notes like a man preparing for war. They just handed us another weapon. We filed additional charges. The case ballooned into a full-blown financial scandal. Meanwhile, the media circus outside their house didn't let up. Reporters hounded them daily and neighbors started posting videos of my parents losing it on camera, mom screaming at journalists, dad throwing a trash bin at a news fan. Public sympathy? Gone. But the real masterpiece came when Grandma pulled out her ace. Your mother forged my signature, she revealed one afternoon, holding up an old loan document. She took out a second mortgage on my house years ago. I let it slide to keep the peace, but not anymore. Caldwell added elder financial abuse to the growing list of charges. By this point, my parents were drowning legally, financially, socially. But karma wasn't done. Their so-called friends? The ones who used to toast them at every barbecue and holiday party? They turned faster than milk in the sun. One by one, these friends started coming forward with their own stories, how my parents borrowed money and never paid it back, how dad roped them into shady betting schemes, how mom blackmailed PTA members with gossip she collected over the years. What started as a family scandal became a community reckoning. The final straw was when the IRS came knocking. Anonymous tips, courtesy of Uncle Ray and a few well-placed documents, highlighted years of tax evasion and undeclared income. I watched from Grandma's living room as news footage showed federal agents walking out of my childhood home with boxes of evidence. The house that once felt like a prison now looked like a crime scene. And me? I was finally breathing. Lucas, trying to claw back some dignity, helped me release a statement to the local paper detailing the truth, thanking the community for supporting justice, and subtly reminding everyone who the real victims were. Public opinion flipped entirely. Strangers who once avoided me now offered quiet nods of respect when I walked by. But I wasn't after sympathy. I was after closure. When the court date was set, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I was going to face them one last time. Not as their son, but as the person who survived them and made sure they could never hurt anyone again. The courthouse smelled like old wood, stale coffee, and consequences. I sat at the plaintiff's table, flanked by Mr. Caldwell and Grandma, both radiating the kind of quiet confidence that only comes when you know you've already won. Then they walked in. My parents looked nothing like the untouchable figures who once ruled over my life with condescending smirks and backhanded comments. Dad's suit was wrinkled and his hair was disheveled. Mom's makeup, usually flawless, was caked on like she was trying and failing to mask the stress. For a moment, they scanned the room like they still believed someone would swoop in to save them. No one did. When their eyes landed on me, Dad sneered. Mom looked away, ashamed or maybe just calculating. The judge entered and the trial began. Caldwell wasted no time. He laid out every piece of evidence like a master conductor leading a symphony of destruction, fraud, identity theft, elder abuse, defamation, tax evasion, and that little cherry on top, the life insurance policy. Each exhibit felt like a punch they couldn't dodge. But then came the twist. During cross-examination, my mother snapped. "This is all his fault," she screamed, pointing at me with a shaking hand. "If he wasn't such a useless, ungrateful brat, we wouldn't have had to do any of this." Gasps echoed through the courtroom. The judge banged his gavel, demanding order, but the damage was done. For years, they hid behind fake smiles and polished appearances. Now everyone saw them for what they truly were. The prosecution called their final witness Uncle Ray. He testified about the loan sharks, the threats, and the years of manipulation behind closed doors. His voice was steady, but his eyes burned with betrayal. They didn't just fail as parents, he said, looking directly at the jury. They weaponized their child to cover their sins. When closing arguments wrapped, the jury didn't take long. Guilty. On nearly every count. The judge's sentence was swift and merciless, prison time for both, hefty restitution fines, and permanent marks on their financial and legal records. As they were led away in handcuffs, Dad finally broke his silence. He turned to me, eyes full of spite. "You think you've won? You're nothing without us." I stood up, meeting his glare with the calm he could never break. "I was nothing because of you," I said quietly. "Yeah? I'm free." Mom didn't even look back. Outside, reporters swarmed, but I didn't stop to give statements. Grandma wrapped an arm around my shoulders, pride radiating off her. "It's over," she said softly. But as I looked back at the courthouse, I knew it wasn't just about ending their reign of abuse. Hope you enjoyed this story as much as I do. Help this small channel grow by hitting that like button, subscribing, and sharing with your friends. Every bit of support means the world. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one.